Good morning. My name is Justice. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to the start of MHS's webinar series, ADHD Uncovered, Strategies for Supporting Youth and Adults. We are thrilled to have you here today, and we'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about MHS Clinical and Education Divisions. MHS Clinical specializes in aiding the identification and treatment of psychological disorders for improved patient outcomes in all stages of life. MHS Education specializes in providing the expertise and resources required to help children and adolescents reach their full potential in and beyond the classroom. With our advanced suite of tools, team of experts, and robust data sets, we help clients provide comprehensive evaluation and uncover powerful insights. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today. Julie Skolnick, founder of With Understanding Comes Calm, passionately guides parents of gifted and distractible children, mentors 2E adults, trains educators, and advises professionals on how to bring out the best and raise self-confidence in their 2E students and clients. A prolific writer and beloved speaker, Julie hosts the Haystack 2E Adult Membership Group, which welcomes all 2E adult needles, hosts Let's Talk 2E Parent Empowerment Groups, produces virtual conferences, and publishes Gifted and Distractible, a free weekly newsletter. Her book, Gifted and Distractible, Understanding, Supporting, and Advocating for Your Twice Exceptional Child has received wide acclaim. Julie and her husband raise 3 twice exceptional kids who keep them on their toes and uproariously laughing. Located in Maryland, USA, Julie's clients and audience hail from all 4 corners of the globe. Now let's start the webinar.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, MHS, for inviting me to come speak about this very important and I think kind of provocative topic, the uncanny likeness between giftedness and ADHD. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And yes, I do feel that 2E adults feel that they are needles in a haystack, hence the name of our membership, the Haystack. But really, it feels like 2E is just a needle in a haystack. Twice exceptional. So we're going to unpack if you're going, wait, what is she even talking about? Don't worry, we're going to learn about that in this webinar. So we're going to do a deep dive into the uncanny likeness between giftedness and ADHD. And this is such an important topic because when we think about and we juxtapose giftedness and ADHD, there are so many assumptions made about these 2 diagnoses. And yes, by the way, giftedness is a diagnosis. And I have been working for years with practitioners that when they identify somebody as gifted, that they have to explain that giftedness is a thing. It is not just being smart. And we're going to talk even more about that and get really into the weeds on what does gifted actually mean and how does it play in the sandbox with ADHD. But let's just think about this for a moment, because right now you guys are kind of like you're listening for the first time and you're finding out about this topic. And the truth is that what we know is the less you know about others, the more you make up, as my friend and colleague Donna Y. Ford says, right? We have lots of assumptions about those words, giftedness and ADHD. Take a second and think in your own head, what did those words bring up for you in your mind? So let's talk about what it really means to be twice exceptional. The words on the right of your screen, 2E GTLD, which stands for gifted, talented, and learning differenced, or some people say learning disabled, but I prefer to say learning differenced. Neurodiverse, multi-exceptional. Have you heard of these terms before, right? And then I throw my net quite widely. I cast my net quite widely, and I say gifted and distractible to catch all of the gifted ands. All of those diagnoses, including ADHD, but can mean all sorts of other things too. Can mean dyslexia, dysgraphia, auditory processing, working memory, executive functions, autism. There's so many learning differences that are out there that word distractible stands for. But today we're going to talk about ADHD and gifted. And when we talk about ADHD and gifted, like one of them has a glass half empty approach. Oh, ADHD. I mean, think about what it actually means. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Like, could there be a worse term? Or gifted, like who doesn't like gifts, right? So we've got this glass half empty. We're just going to think ADHD bad, gifted, good. No, that's just not correct. Those assumptions aren't appropriate or accurate. So one of them has very low expectations and receives the message, I don't think you can do these things, or you're really bad at these things, or you can't do the really cool stuff until you get all the stuff you can't do under control. And the other is like, you should be able to do this, no problem, right? And both of those assumptions, the assumed low and the assumed high expectations, aren't appropriate. So let's take a look at some myths. We're going to look at ADHD myths, and we're going to look at gifted myths in a second. So here are myths. Now, if I was presenting in person, I would probably see like when people would walk in the door, and then I'd say again, these are ADHD myths, because God forbid somebody should just hear the words that I'm saying and think that these are truths. So again, these are myths. People with ADHD have no control. Someone identified with ADHD is always hyper. People with ADHD cannot be leaders. I mean, that's so totally wrong. Just Google leaders in ADHD and you'll find out all the wonderful people in the world who have this creative and awesome brain. ADHD is an illness. All ADHD should take medication to control their ADHD, and there are no advantages to ADHD. And just in case you thought those were the only myths, here are some more. Adults with ADHD should not be trusted with important tasks. When I meet with my Haystack members, my 2E adults, we talk a lot about sort of the messaging that you received as a child that you bring into your adulthood and into work and into relationships when you are identified with ADHD. And you really kind of self-perceive. If you remember when I was introduced, Justice talked about how I really want to bring out self-confidence in 2E people. And people identified with ADHD, almost particularly if they're gifted, because there are all these you should be able to do some things that happen in their world, start to internalize and have imposter syndrome and think that they cannot do certain things. So it's a myth that adults with ADHD should not be trusted with important tasks. And by the way, anesthesiologists are great. It's a great ADHD profession, and that's a pretty important task. So ADHD symptoms are better controlled when children are given consequences for their behavior. When I work with my parent clients, oh my goodness, yes, that can work in some cases, but boy, does it screw up your relationship, and it doesn't work forever. And we're going to talk more about learning lagging skills rather than addressing challenging behavior in a way that is fearful or fear-based. People identified with ADHD cannot be gifted. Social skills groups are the best way to teach ADHD kids how to behave in social situations. And if you're scratching your head over that one, whether you're a parent or a teacher or even a 2E adult, the truth is that 2E people, gifted and ADHD people who are in social skills groups, figure out the rules and just do them there. And they have a really hard time actually applying them in the situation. So not every social skills group, there are some that are structured in a certain way, but people always ask me that question. So I wanted to jump in and clarify. And then deficits must be addressed before addressing potential strengths. That is really the most important myth. I want you to remember that that is a myth. So we're going to talk more about that. All right, so we have this thing called the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's the 5th edition. It's published by the American Psychiatric Association. And I want to unpack what they say about ADHD, because it's really important to understand who are the people who are evaluating and judging and saying what it means to be ADHD. So, and by the way, as I put these phrases on the screen, you'll notice there's a word that is bolded. Notice it's a pretty glass half empty word. It's a negative connotated word. Easily distracted, forgetful, doesn't pay attention to details, makes careless mistakes. This is straight out of the DSM-5. Difficulty keeping attention on schoolwork or play activities, does not follow through on instructions or assignments, does not seem to listen when spoken to directly, trouble organizing, often loses things needed for schoolwork and activities, avoids activities that require mental effort, like classwork, homework, or work for our 2E adults, appears restless, driven by a motor, fidgets, and squirms, and often talks excessively, has difficulty waiting one's turn, and interrupts. I had a client once who had a child profoundly gifted. There are different levels of giftedness, and this child was profoundly gifted. and identified with ADHD. Actually, this child self-identified as ADHD, HHHHHD. And he won and was the president of his class, very charismatic, as ADHDers often are, but then was told by school he wasn't allowed to attend the Halloween party because he was talking excessively and not listening to their warnings, not heeding their consequences. And so if you can believe it, that can be something that somebody's punished for. Now, I actually advised that parent to go and pick up their child and take him for ice cream. So I think that's what they did. All right, so to receive an ADHD diagnosis, one should see, and this is again from the DSM-5, 6 or more symptoms, that list that I just presented to you, should be present for at least 6 months in 2 or more settings, such as home, school, or work with friends or relatives in other activities. And there should be clear evidence that these symptoms are affecting negatively the quality of life for this person. So 6 or more of those symptoms that I went through, present for at least 6 months in 2 or more settings. So I have a professional psychologist I was consulting with to help understand his cases through a 2E lens. I was really trying to help him understand the 2E experience. And there was he had parents who really wanted their child to have medication because she wasn't able to focus in school. And when I asked, well, what does she look like in other settings? What is she like at home? The only place that symptoms were presenting was school. And we'll talk more about environment, but they're parking lot that idea of how important the environment is to bring out the best or the worst in a twice exceptional human. Okay, so I promised we'd shift and talk about giftedness myths. Again, these are myths. Giftedness is a matter of hard work. When I'm presenting in person, I have people snap their fingers when something relates. So go ahead and snap away if something relates or just nod your head. But it's a matter of hard work. That's what giftedness is. Or, you know what? Kids are gifted because their parents influenced them, or adults are gifted because they had an upbringing in a certain way. All children are gifted. I had a head of school say to me once, you know, Julie, I hate the term gifted. All kids have gifts. Well, they do. All kids, I'm sure, have gifts, but they're not all gifted. Gifted means something different. They're well organized. They have good study skills. They become eminent adults. No pressure there. They don't have learning challenges. Well, we're here for a reason, and there are learning differences that co-occur with giftedness. They're not aware of their differences. They're easier to raise. They're easier to teach, right? These are all myths. What that easier to teach idea is the high achiever. It's not a gifted person. The sit and face forward and hand in your homework and raise your hand, that's not gifted and shouldn't be. Gifted is the up and about in the room and project-based learning and pushing back and questioning, and that's what gifted is. But let's actually talk about a definition of gifted. So the reason why people don't really understand what gifted is because we don't have just one definition. In the United States, states may have a definition, may not have a definition. There's no mandate. So in the 1980s, in Columbus, Ohio, hence the name of this group of people, the Columbus Group, got together, and it consisted of parents, educators, and clinicians really seeking to define the inner experience of what it means to be gifted. And so I'm going to put this definition up on the screen. We're going to read it together, and then we're going to unpack it together. Okay, so what is gifted according to the Columbus Group? Gifted is asynchronous development. Don't worry, I'm going to unpack all these terms in a second. Asynchronous development, think of it for now as uneven development. You have these superpowers and these challenges, these strengths, these struggles, in which advanced cognitive abilities, that smart assumption, and heightened intensity, anybody know a gifted kid who's intense, combine to create inner experiences and awareness that are qualitatively different from the norm. So you've got this uneven development, and you've got this incredible ability in some place, and you also have intensity in probably more than one place. And those combine, and therefore you are experiencing the world different than the neurotypical kid sitting next to you in the classroom, or the neurotypical adult sitting next to you in the cubicle, or, you know, as a teacher, you're seeing this in your classroom. This asynchrony increases with higher intellectual capacity. That's saying that if you think of the bell curve of intelligence and the IQ is higher, higher IQ is more standard deviations away from norm, just as lower IQ is more standard deviations away from norm. And then the last sentence is my very favorite sentence. The uniqueness of the gifted renders them vulnerable and requires modifications in parenting, teaching, and counseling in order for them to develop optimally. So important. So when I teach, I love to role model, and therefore I'm going to use images and acronyms, and you'll see all of this. And so my first image for you is the 3-layer cake of giftedness. The frosting, which is only this thin, guys, look at me at the screen. It's only this thin. The frosting, or icing, as our European counterparts like to say, is above, around, and between all the layers. And that stands for the SMART assumption of giftedness. And then we have these 3 layers, or 3 characteristics: asynchronous development, perfectionism, and intensities, or what's known in gifted parlance as overexcitabilities. How many people have heard the term overexcitabilities? Pretty important term in gifted land. If you don't know it, head over to withunderstandingcomescalm.com, and you're welcome to search under overexcitabilities. You'll find lots of blogs. I've been writing blogs once a month since 2014. So lots of blogs on overexcitabilities, or you can just do a Google search and you'll have a fire hose of overexcitability articles and blogs. But we're going to talk about them right now. So let's start with asynchronous development. So I gave you a little idea when we were talking about the Columbus Group definition of giftedness, about asynchronous development. So this is how I draw a human. What you're looking at, that 3-ring Venn diagram, that's intellectual self, social emotional self, and physical self, okay? All during the day, we are calling on those parts of ourselves to work for us, right? Right now, you're sitting there, or maybe you're standing, and bravo for you if you're standing or pacing or doing or on your treadmill or whatever to keep your mind focused. But you're calling on your intellectual self to pay attention, your physical self, like I just talked about, if you're standing or walking or doing jumping jacks, I don't really care. And I always tell people when I speak in person, do you, man, whatever you got to do to pay attention to me, that's great. And your social emotional self. So maybe I'm saying things that you're like, oh, wow, aha moment for me, my kid, my spouse, my friend, my mother, whatever. But all during the day, you're calling on these parts of yourself, and you have, as a 2E person, has a superpower and a struggle in those realms. There's social emotional intensity or social skills that are lagging, there are physical needs, the intellectual piece, there might be a learning difference, right? So the way that I love to talk about asynchronous development is the 5-10-15 rule, which means if you have a kid who's 10 chronologically, 15 in some superpower area, but 5 somewhere else, which is the learning difference or the social emotional lag that's happening for them. And for ADHD guys, it's, is it Russell Barkley? Yes, who talks about the 30% rule. And the 30% rule means you take the age and you take off 30%. So if you're 10 and you're identified with ADHD, socially, emotionally, you're really more like 7. And since our brains really mature at 25, my 3 beautiful, twice exceptional kiddos, right? 23, 21, and 15. My 21-year-old, you know, sometimes I have to subtract 6 years. Yeah, and that is the truth. Okay, so let's talk about some asynchronous development examples. So we have this math whiz, right? This child who can solve high-level mathematical equations, but needs to pace while doing so, right? Like I said, you knock yourself out. Of course, I can't see you right now, but if you were in my room, my office with me, or in someplace where I was presenting in person, I'd still always start by saying, if you need to get up and you need to move, do it. But that doesn't always happen and doesn't always work in a classroom or in a work situation. I have a client, an adult client, who liked to sit on her chair, like with her knees bent. So her feet were behind her and she was sitting on her like thighs. And that was something they cited when they fired her, because that's what she needed to do. So we can think about the judgment of our, this asynchrony within our gifted and ADHD kids. Okay, so let's say we have a reader who reads several grade levels above but can't write a coherent essay, may be identified with dysgraphia or written expression disorder, that person might be considered for a remedial classroom. And we actually have pretty awesome examples of grown-ups in the psychology world who were that kid. Jonathan Mooney, Scott Barry Kaufman, both in special education classes, both have written books, both are famous speakers on gifted and twice exceptionality. So, and then we have, and this is really close to my heart, the existential curiosity. I think this is like the secret sauce of being gifted, that way from such an early age of seeing the world in this holistic way and understanding the weight and potential of the world. But in many ways, first of all, that's a very mature outlook. So you're going to have difficulty relating to age peers. You're going to have this social emotional lag. And it also can lead to lots of other mental health challenges, anxiety and depression, when you have this ability to understand the world in this existential way and people's needs in an existential way. And when parents and teachers encourage play dates for this type of child with age peers or age appropriate peers, it is really a recipe for disaster, right? It's much more important to encourage interest peers. For some reason, I have a lot of clients whose kids like to dig in the dirt. I mean, it's cool, right? It's like a treasure hunt during recess. And teachers seem to get upset about it. Like, why are they not playing with other kids? And why? And it might be that this kid is like really doing some science experiment in their own head, and it's actually helping them fill their cups so that they can do the hard stuff when they get back into school. Okay, so that was asynchronous development. Let's talk about perfectionism and ADHD, right? So we see difficulty initiating assignments, failure to turn in assignments, misunderstanding the child's need to move, they're challenged to regulate their emotions, and they are frequently misunderstood. The other side of perfectionism, that need, see, 2E people can see exactly what they want something to look like. And when they can't do it in that perfect way, it's a problem. And that and executive functioning challenges come into play for the ADHD and gifted person, where it's hard to get things done or to feel okay with doing something in a way that maybe isn't exactly the way that they saw it in their head. There's this challenge to control their emotions and their impulses. And sometimes they perseverate to the point of paralysis. And what we want to avoid is what this cute little girl is saying in her head: if I can't do this the way I want to or the way I know others expect me to, why try? Okay, so let's get to overexcitabilities. That thing I said to you was so important. So this overexcitabilities, the term was coined by Kazimierz Dabrowski, a psychologist, and he talked about it as a higher than average responsiveness to stimuli due to heightened sensitivity of the nervous system receptors. The second part is more important because I want you to know this is biological, this is neurological, this is not something that we're going to say, oh, you're so fill in the blank, get it together, put on your big girl pants, man up. We're not going to say those things because these are actually neurological, biological ways that a gifted person comes into the world. And Dabrowski identified 5 areas of overexcitabilities: intellectual, emotional, imaginational, sensual, and psychomotor. So I want to talk about these through the ADHD lens. So we have this intellectually gifted kid, so curious, rage to learn, we like to say, but has a really hard time focusing or attending for long periods of time. Organization can suffer, right? For the emotionally overexcitable, and I want you to think about overexcitable actually sounds negative, right? Like overexcitable, too much. But actually, if it had been translated from the original Polish, it would have been super stimulatability, which I think is way more fun to say than overexcitability, but for some reason, it didn't come into the lexicon. So super stimulatability, it means you have this incredible superpower in this area, which can be incredibly fulfilling or can be painful and challenging. So the emotional overexcitability, look at this guy in his little yellow shirt. He's like either just got the most epic Lego set in the world or he's horrified, right? Like, and pretty much that defines emotional overexcitability for gifted people. So if you are passionate and excited and you're identified with ADHD, you might also appear impulsive, right? Or an ADHD kid who has a hard time regulating emotions because of executive functioning deficit. By the way, that's another talk I give on executive functioning. It's the social skills are 100% executive functioning. They may look a lot like an emotionally overexcitable kid. Imaginationally overexcitable people are those people who are so creative, so clever in many different ways. Right? Could be artistically, could be charismatically, could be, you know, building in Minecraft. Or I think about when my kids used to want to go to the Ripley's Believe It or Not, they'd have like these 2-scale cities built out of toothpicks, right? Like that's imaginational overexcitability. So this child may be misdiagnosed with ADD because if you're what's happening in here is so rich and so interesting, why would you attend to what's happening in front of you, right? You have this incredible internal mind. And then psychomotor overexcitability, there is this abundant need for movement. Remember the ADHD guy? Yeah. So psychomotor overexcitability, by the way, remember, this is the 3-layer cake of giftedness. So you're seeing so many traits of gifted that seem to be similar to ADHD, which brings me to today's handout. So please go ahead, and you might have received it, or you're welcome to scan the QR code on your screen. I created a chart called the Uncanny Likeness Between Giftedness and ADHD. And I created the chart to demonstrate just how similar these two diagnoses are so that we can pause when we make assumptions. So we can think about what is really going on for this kid or this adult, and what do they need? That is a skipped step often. It's sometimes we say to ourselves, how do I get this kid to do the thing I need them to do, right? The question should really be flipped. Okay, so you on the screen, you're just going to see a couple of the many, so internal challenges, external challenges. I put challenges in quotes because I'm such a positive reframer. I hate using negative words, but they are challenges. So internal, I'm only sharing 2, but the full chart for internal challenges includes motivation, ability to stay on task, ability to organize, and self-control. So let's talk about motivation. If you are gifted, you're highly motivated for topics of interest. Oh my gosh, can I tell you how many clients say to me, I can't get my kid out the door. I can't get my kid to brush his teeth. That's huge. Teeth brushing is huge. Morning routine, evening routine, they're all really hard. They're unmotivated for rote or meaningless tasks. I had a client once whose kid came down the stairs. I think he was maybe 8. He's in his pajamas, stamps his foot and says, why is life so hard? Parents were like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Dad's like a neurologist and mom is a lawyer. And the kid is like, why do I have to get dressed? You know, he was like in the middle of a really important Lego build for him. So it's really hard to get motivated for topics of interest or interest of others. ADHD, again, difficulty getting motivated for others' priorities or uninteresting pursuits. Kind of hair's breadth away from each other, right? Okay, so how about self-control? If you're gifted, you're excited, you're enthusiastic about discoveries, you have this rage to learn, you're hyper-focusing, you think and act quickly before you process because you know in your gut what you want to do. And for ADHDers, that's called impulsivity. And it often you seem to act or react without thinking, right? Okay. So let's look at external challenges. And again, there's just 2 on the screen here. The full list includes listening, activity level, interactions with adults, following directions, and verbal expression. So ability to listen, or I put in a parenthetical there, appear to listen, and gifted. So gifted people don't just do one thing. I remember sitting down with one of my kids, and if we were playing cards, he was also playing chess and might have been drawing something, right? Like at the same time. We never just did one thing. They're preoccupied with thoughts and interests. They may look like they're not paying attention, but man, you ask that gifted kid the answer to the question you just talked about, and they know it. For ADHD, they don't appear to listen. They're easily distracted, right? There's a focus issue. And then for verbal expression, gifted people have advanced vocabulary. They may be talking over somebody to finish a point. Like there's so often that I talk about with parents and 2E adults about how to do the cost benefit analysis, like friend or make your point. Sometimes we have to think about that and understand perspective, because this rage to learn and share and the curiosity, right? That is both our greatest strength, but also Achilles' heel, and is often tamped down by others. And for ADHD, that excessive talking I talked about with that kid who wasn't allowed to go to the party that he planned as the president of the class. They use a loud voice, they may interrupt or blurt out. There's like this impulsivity, right? So why the chart? Why did I make this chart? And you're all scratching your heads going, oh my God, is it the same thing? No, it's not the same thing. So as we know from the DSM-5, right, remember, the symptoms must present in 2 or more settings and interfere with the person's quality of life. So that's first of all, and very important to remember. But they're close cousins, gifted and ADHD, right? There's a lot of, ADHD is such a really awesome brain. And one gets a bad rap and one garners this outlandish expectations, right? And so I want you to think about that glass half full, that glass half empty, and most importantly, think about the environment. So that child that I gave the example where the parents really wanted to, and I'm not making an opinion on medication at all. I am not an MD. I'm not qualified, but we have to ask ourselves, what does the environment look like? Medication can be an amazing tool, absolutely. But there are also other things that have to be considered, right? Is this child actually being challenged in the classroom? Is this child's emotions being listened to because they're intense, they're emotionally overexcitable? Something has affected them that has made them unable to pay attention, and they need to work through that, right? Those are considerations to think about. So remember, it is far more important to understand the individual gifted and ADHD experience than to point to behavior as proving that a child is either gifted or ADHD or both. We have to look at the individual. We have to consider the needs. And the younger the child, the harder that might actually be. So ask yourself these questions. Are the symptoms exhibited in all areas of the child's life? Are those symptoms due to the environment? What are they not getting, or what are they getting too much of in their environment? If the behavior didn't annoy the adults in the room, would the child be enjoying herself? That is a very interesting question. When the child is with an age peer, are they behaving similarly? And when the child's with an interest peer, do they seem more regulated? And would the behavior be valued if the person displaying the behavior was an adult? So pushing back, asking why, challenging, right? Sometimes we feel like that's disrespectful if a child does that to a parent or a teacher, but that is critical thinking. And we might really like our accountant, lawyer, doctor to critically think. Okay, so let's talk about inappropriate expectations. 2E kids suffer when there are undue expectations, and they exist because we're not taking into account the other complex characteristics that I just went through that define their day-to-day experience, right? So much behavior can and is anticipated, but somehow parents, educators, clinicians repeatedly apply inappropriate expectations that could be avoided by paying attention to what we already know. So, for instance, if something like transitions or emotion regulation were challenges yesterday, I promise you, they're not just going to wake up magically, they're going to be gone. So wanting, wishing, or punishing children who exhibit what my wonderful colleague Ross Green refers to as lagging skills does not teach those skills. Are we doing something that is teaching skills, or are we doing something that is punishing or using fear, right? Those responses merely serve to make 2E kids feel badly about themselves. So let's dive into a strength-based approach. The first and most important thing in the world is to develop a relationship. I love to say to teachers, find the hardest kid to love and love them the hardest, right? We know, even though we try to come to the school year being objective, We know what little Johnny did in line. We know what little Susie did on the playground, and we know what Cindy did in lab with the frog, right? But those kids, they will explain to you that I either attract or repel people. I'm really charismatic, but I either attract or repel people. Most adults are in the repel category. So if you take the time to sit down with these kids and find out more about them, what makes them tick, what ticks them off, then you are going to breed such loyalty in them, because most people don't take the time to do that. And then make meaningful connections, and make connections meaningful, meaning let's find out that, gifted and 2E kids have incredible interests. So let's find out what their interests are. So maybe we can relate. Maybe we can share. Maybe we can bond through that. Maybe I can even make my classroom something that's relevant. Remember, we talked about relevance and how important that is to gifted and 2E people. And so perhaps we can make our lessons more relevant if we know what our 2E kids' interests and passions are. Maybe we can fold in choice for them. And for parents, it's the same thing. You got to spend some time. It's very hard when there are siblings. Very often, the 2E kid requires a lot of attention. And so it's very important to intentionally carve out specific time for your neurotypical kids or your less challenging 2E kids. And having that special time, though, with the 2E child, leaning into their interests, we'll talk about that more, is really important as well. The reason is I talk about how these kids have layers of mud all through their days, their years in school, at home, on the playground, on the sports field, in school, in a doctor's office. I once had a client where the dentist, the 2E kid was asking so many questions. The dentist literally took, I'm not kidding, I did not make this up. I did not make this up because I'm going to tell you it was my kid. The dentist took the squirty thing that they rinsed them out and squirted the kid to get him to shut up. Can you imagine? Yes, we stopped going to that dentist. But here's the thing. Throughout their lives, 2E kids have these layers of mud slung at them. And in order to get clean, you have to get dirty. You have to get into the mud. You can't just ignore it and hope it goes away and do all the things for them. So first we have to get meta, right? We have to help our kids understand, like I did that cost benefit analysis before, we have to help our kids understand and give them perspective, right? Unfortunately, a typical approach is, when you say or do this, it makes me feel this or that. It doesn't really work with 2E kids. It's important to share perspective, but we have to help them understand, right? We all come to the world looking through our own eyeballs, so we don't really get that other people are wired differently. That is a shock for 2E kids because they're so different. So we have to kind of uncover their strengths and lean into those strengths and talk about when things are hard in a way that isn't so judgmental. And do we do that by asking questions, right? We unpack behavior with them by asking questions like, how did that go for you? And what do you think the other person was thinking? And doing it in a very non-judgmental tone and a non-judgmental way. And then validating. Validating is really important because remember, no kid wants to be the bad kid. They're all trying super hard. So we have to validate when they share hard stuff. Wow, that sounds like it was really tough or difficult, or I bet that didn't feel really great. We have to help chip away at those layers of mud. Part of the way we do that is by reframing. So this is a page from my website. This is my hyperattention and activity deficit blog when I renamed ADHD because I hate the name attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Oh. And so what we have to remember is there's creativity and passion and unique problem solving and energy. Oh my gosh, at this point in my life, boy, that ADHD energy sounds really good about now. I'd like to drink a glass of that ADHD energy. So we have to reframe and remember the positives, the creativity. Man, you definitely want your EMT or your firefighter, anybody in a emergency situation, or your OR doctor. ADHD is a great brain. Okay, so let's reframe. And I want you to close your eyes. Please close your eyes. Think about the kiddo or the 2E person who's popping into your brain as I'm speaking. And we're going to dedicate These next two slides are actually the whole presentation to them, but right now we're going to really think about them in our minds. Okay, open your eyes, and thank you for playing along if you did. And instead of, we're reframing, instead of, don't we want this child to be able to focus in school? We're going to say, or we're going to ask, is the environment actually properly stimulating this child's intellectual ability and capacity? How about rather than diagnose and fix, that medical model we all know so well, understand and address deeper underlying problems? Rather than changing the child, change the environment. That could be your mantra. Rather than changing the child, change the environment. Super important. Okay, what you're looking at on the screen right now is the rage bell curve, right? At the top, at the apex, there's no teaching, there's no learning, there's no changing behavior ever. And it's always when we try to do it. So guess what, guys? You know a ton about the kiddo or the person you're here for. You can anticipate. Now, we are human, so you may not actually be on your best game all the time, and you can't anticipate, well, you're going to reflect. Those are the two times when you can think about and address skills and behaviors that you might want to change, right? Learning happens on either side of the bell curve, the rage bell curve, I say. Okay, so let's see how much we can anticipate. Use what you know. What I'm about to put on the screen are common challenges, or what we're going to call lagging skills. Okay, ready? Emotion regulation. Does this kiddo have challenges regulating their emotions? How about frustration tolerance? Is that tough for them? What about anxiety? Does that rear its head in your 2E child or student? Impulsivity, social skills, risk aversion, refusal, school or task refusal, perfectionism that we talked about before, sensory issues as we talked about before, needing to move. Maybe they're distractible. They have mental fatigue, right? They just cannot do one more thing. Maybe their linear organization skills are not apparent, right? We talk about hurricane minds. Linear organization is not a thing 2E people do. It's like that book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, right? Like if I'm thinking about this thing, oh my gosh, that makes me think about this thing. It makes me think about this thing. And I don't go linear. How about need for novelty, right? Because of that incredible creativity of the ADHD and gifted mind. Following rules, not a strong suit. Why? Because we probably have a better way, or we think we have a better way. And until we get to try it out, we won't know whether we did or not have a better way. And we want to try it out. And then motivation. Sometimes we're just not motivated to do stuff because it's not of our interest. Right? Remember our little kiddo stopping his feet because he had to get dressed. Okay, so those were our lagging skills. Let's talk about, and we could anticipate them all. Like you're all like, oh my gosh, are you in my classroom? Are you in my home, Julie? How do you know all that? Yeah, because we can anticipate it because there are themes and patterns that happen for our 2E kiddos based on their neurology, based on their brains. Okay. So let's talk about common challenging moments at home, at school, and both. Can you tell I like Venn diagrams? Yes, I do. Okay, so at home, homework, that's super easy. No. How about chores? Morning routine, I already talked about that. Meal times, bedtime, long car rides, get-togethers. And at school, on the playground, when we need all of our social skills and we're annoyed and we want to do the thing we want to do, and the cafeteria where it's super loud and lots of noises and smells and lights, riding the bus, same thing, noises, smells, lights, and social, sitting on the bus. PE, you got to sit on the line. Are you kidding me? You want me to, wait, PE, physical education, why do I have to sit on the line? How about required extensive sitting or a rigid teacher? Arrival time when it's unstructured, group work because of the social skills, and usually the 2E kid has way stronger skills intellectually, but executive functioning are challenges and they feel like other people don't do the work. And then instruction in the area of the learning difference. That's never a fun time for our 2E kids. And then in both transitions, a new situation, a change in plans, and the dreaded screen time. Okay, so these are challenging moments and unsolved problems. All right, so let's look at those lagging skills plus unsolved problems. I'm on the right side of the screen. My little mathematical, this is about the best math that I can do. Lagging skills plus unsolved problems equal challenging behaviors. So all those lagging skills we put on the screen and the unsolved problems, we can anticipate all of them. So let's use grace and kindness and override all of our assumptions, and let's look at Ross Greene's wonderful mantras. Children do well if they can. An unrealistic expectation is a challenging behavior waiting to happen. And this is a departure from all those assumptions of the child is attention seeking and manipulative and limit testing and poorly motivated. Okay, so what are our strategies? I'm going to put it now. The book, Gifted and Distractible, this baby has 200 pages of strategies in it. And I'm going to share with you, and I've been sharing some, and I'll share more, but I'm going to share these 4 on this slide, okay? And these are strategies really for building rapport and effectively addressing and changing behavior. And I'm going to start with leaning in. Okay, so what do I mean by leaning in? We need to lean in 2 ways. One way is into their interests, and the other is to temporarily lower an expectation, to lean into what's actually happening for that child or that person rather than making myself the priority, right? So this is giving the benefit of the doubt. So let me give some examples. I had a client parent once who had this child who was really artistic, but she also really loved organizing her materials, and that drove the mom crazy. The mom just wanted to get to the project. And so it was always a fight, and then there wasn't enough time, and then it ended up, instead of being a wonderful thing, it ended up being a really challenging, stressful thing to do an art project. Another example is actually, I just thought of this from my own, when my oldest, my 23-year-old, was 2. We had a finished attic playroom that I had painted. It was really cool. And it had like these spiral stairs that went up. And I remember my oldest was like really enthralled. I mean, I think maybe 18 months, 2 years old, with like little things found in the carpet, pulling things out of the carpet, like not pulling the carpet, just pulling like little sparkle things or something that they'd find. And I remember being like, come on, let's go play. And then I was like, wait a minute, I think maybe we are playing. Right? Leaning into that child's interest. And in a classroom, that might look like having choices and really understanding what their passions are and giving them different ways of showing what they know. Leaning in can also be a lowered expectation. So you're somewhere, parents, maybe you have a dinner planned at a restaurant and your kiddo is like done, maybe very close to the top of that rage bell curve. You're going to lean in and you're going to divide and conquer. You're not going to make that kid go to the restaurant because it's just going to be an awful experience for everybody. You're in the classroom, maybe the kid needs a break. Maybe they need to walk somewhere, talk to a counselor, have a pass. Maybe they need to not do as much homework or all the things on the homework, right? We're going to lean into this kid's needs because it's not going to be forever. Teachers always ask me that, but their life won't be that way. It's not going to be forever. You're teaching them to regulate their emotions. And you're also avoiding really bad self-esteem topplers, right? The more negative feedback that they get, the more they feel negative about themselves. Okay, so let's talk about the parent pivot or the teacher twist. And I talked a little bit about this. It requires us to ask questions rather than tell. It requires us to lead rather than solve. So what do I mean by this? So this is a very, very, really impactful strategy. We see the train coming down the track, whether we're a parent or a teacher, like that it's going to crash. So we're going to throw ourselves in front of that train. And when we do that, our message to our 2E child or student is, I don't think you can do this. I need to do it for you. So instead, we ask questions. So if we have a child who's complaining about homework or complaining about going back to school or complaining about friendships or whatever it is, sometimes we feel, especially parents, feel like defending. Oh, I can't believe that teacher. Oh, I can't believe that kid. Oh, I can't believe that other parent. Sometimes we blame the kid. I can't believe you said that. Of course they're going to react that way. Instead, now you have to apologize. Instead, we're going to say something like, I wonder how that made the other person feel. I wonder what the other person was thinking at that point. I wonder what your goal was. What do you think you're going to do about that? What's your plan? Right? We ask these questions. Or for a kid who's struggling with executive functioning issues and they need to write a paper, we're going to say, I'm going to think about this from the reader's point of view. What is the reader wondering right now? Oh, I see you said this. The reader wonders this. Rather than saying, well, you got to have more information about the color of the dress and the street they were walking on or whatever. But when you ask questions, it makes a groove in the child's brain. And so we're relinquishing our frontal lobe and we're allowing them to tap into theirs. Okay, how about creating a wake? So think about a wake as what's behind a boat, right? When there's a wake, it kind of grabs everything and brings it in toward itself. So creating a wake, what I mean by that is rather than we're leaving in 5 minutes, we're leaving in 4 minutes, we're leaving in 3 minutes, we're leaving. Oh my goodness gracious. Instead of that, we're going to actually leave. We're going to create that wake. Of course, we're going to structure the beginning part of that. And by the way, we will do a parent pivot and we will ask questions. What are the things that you need to do to get ready to leave by X o'clock? And then we're going to have the child tell us, and then we're going to create that wake and we're going to go. Or easy example, let's say I want my kid to brush his teeth, right? I'm going to say, okay, time to brush your teeth, and I'm going to start telling a dad joke. And I'm going to tell that dad joke as I'm walking up the stairs. And the kid's going to follow me because they want to know the dad joke. And I'm creating this wake, and I'm going to brush my teeth with the child. So rather than talking so much about it, I'm just going to do it. And in a classroom situation, that's the same sort of thing, is making sure that they understand what they're supposed to do, and then just starting it without all the discussion, without all the the power struggles. So this is to accomplish or to avoid. You can create a wake to avoid when, let's say, you have two kids who are fighting over something, right? Rather than, if you don't stop, blah, blah, blah will happen. Instead, you do something, you create a wake. Let's say you start reading a story in a funny accent. You just ignore and you create a wake to bring them along with you. So many times parents are like, we have to leave in 5 minutes, and their shoes aren't on, right? You have to lead the way. Okay, so I brought up power struggle there for a second. So I would like everybody to play a game with me. So put your hands in front of you like this, and I'm going to pull you toward me. We're playing tug of war. Okay, now you pull me toward you. Okay, now I'm pulling you toward me. Come on, I know you're sitting there alone, but pretend you're with me. Come toward me, come toward me. Okay, now pull me toward you. I dropped the rope. That is the visual I want you to have when you get into a power struggle. 2E kids get into power struggles all the time. When was the last power struggle you were in with your 2E child or student? Oh, 30 seconds ago? Okay, you had to mute me because they were doing something? Yeah, I know. So we want to dismantle conflict. We want to drop the rope. Keep that in your brain. There's no reason to be right. If they're wrong, if they're right or they're wrong, it's okay. That is not, getting into that power struggle does not serve anybody. And again, it goes back to the first thing I said, which was so important to have a strong personal connection. Power struggles disrupt those personal connections. Okay, so let's think about the quick fixes for anticipating, right? We're talking about anticipating behavior. Well, you've got a kid who doesn't turn in homework. That happens a lot with gifted and ADHD kids. So make them the homework helper. If they're collecting homework, hopefully they're going to be like, oh, I'm collecting everybody's homework. Ooh, maybe I should turn in mine. Or the town crier, that kid who doesn't follow any of the rules or remember the rules, have them be the one who kind of reads them off the board and reminds everybody of the rules. And maybe because you've created the rules by doing a teacher twist, you've asked questions, you didn't just say the rules, you asked the community what the rules were. Maybe that's going to be a way that this town crier can really be involved. Music for transitions. Transitions are hard, so you know what I recommend to my parent clients in the morning and my teacher clients during the day is to have specific music chosen by the child that represents something. So the first song is getting up in the morning and going into the bathroom. And the second song is brushing teeth and washing face. And the third song is going downstairs for breakfast. And you can do the same thing in a classroom, whether it's music or music goes on for a transition. Music is a beautiful, wonderful, and emotion regulator, especially if it's classical music or dance, fun music. Okay, and last but not least is a tomato timer. So this is great for productivity. It's also known as a Pomodoro timer. If the child gets distracted and is not able to focus for long periods of time, or the adult, this is a great, actually, I think it was actually created for adults, but the tomato timer, you can go to, I think, tomatotimer.com, but just Google it, or you can just do this on your own, which is to set a certain amount of time to work. So let's say 10, 15, 20 minutes with a 2, 3, 5-minute break. Now, for the tomato timer to actually work, you have to have that break not be on a screen. It's not time to check your email. It's not time to text your friends. It's time to stand up, walk away from your desk. It would be amazing if you went outside and took a breath, get a drink, get a snack, and then come back and start again. It really is very helpful for focus. Okay, now I want to talk about this very important nuance. We have so many expectations, right? We have so many expectations for our 2E kids and 2E selves. Do your homework, clean your room, write a paper, fill out this worksheet. Guess what? Those are not expectations. Nope. They're responsibilities. And the reason, one of the reasons they're really hard to do is because the expectations have not been explained clearly. Remember when I talked about looking through our own eyeballs? As adults, we look through our own eyeballs. It's all very clear in our heads that you have to get dressed to go to school, to get out the door, right? So let's look at clean your room, for instance. That is a responsibility. We would do a parent pivot and we would say, talk to me about what you think cleaning your room means. Let's generate some tasks for cleaning your room. What does it mean? If that's hard, let's look at the floor. Let's look at surfaces. Let's look at the bed. Let's look at your desk, right? Because if you say clean your room, the 2E kiddo is going to go like this. Clean my room, clean my room, clean my room. Okay, standing in my room. Well, clearly she doesn't mean the 400 Legos on the floor because I'm in the middle of that Lego build, right? So, whoa, that was a disconnect. Even taking out the recycling. When does that happen? Do you have to replace a bag? What, all the expectations. Same thing with writing a paper, breaking down the tasks, but having the child really talk to you about the tasks and what is expected. What are those expectations? Do you actually know? So often parents come to me to talk about structuring screen time, and they have no idea what they want. How many hours, what days a week, how many days, right? So we have to really think about those expectations. Otherwise, our kids cannot meet the responsibilities we have for them, especially our gifted ADHD kids who are famous for weak executive functioning skills. All right, here's the big fallacy, guys, and I alluded to it before. If I use what they love as an incentive or a consequence, meaning I hold back something they want until they do what I want, then they'll meet my expectation. And actually, the opposite is true. If you allow the child to do the things that they're really interested in, that is going to help them learn lagging skills. They'll be incentivized and motivated to do the thing that you want them to do. You'll find that certain challenges and lagging skills fall away because the motivation is so high. And that is the secret sauce. Okay, so bottom line, we need balance. We need to avoid assumptions. We need a strength-based approach. We need to adjust our expectations and make sure they're clear, concise, consistent, and appropriate. We need to ask questions and we need to validate their experience because it's different. And please give the benefit of the doubt. So I'm going to give you a couple of slides now that you can look through. Please sign up and subscribe to our free weekly newsletter. You get my blog once a month, my vlog once a month, articles for all the stakeholders, parents, teachers, and 2E adults, as well as sort of a WUC roundup with Understanding Comes Calm roundup, which is resources for everybody. And if you haven't gotten Gifted and Distractible, we are close to 15,000 copies sold. It is parents, teachers, and 2E adults are loving it. I love it. It's kind of like my fourth child. I'm happy to answer any questions. You can scan to buy, or you can go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever. It's a great book for teachers, to give parents, to give grandparents. Really explains what gifted and distractible means. And if you're interested in the haystack and you were like, I'd like to learn more about that, this is where you can do that. We open registration 4 times a month. I offer free 20-minute consultations, phone consultations to anybody. You can do that there or go to withunderstandingcomescalm.com. And last but not least, I'm everywhere on social media. So please find me, connect, reach out. And it has been my true pleasure to be with you today. And thank you again to MHS for allowing me to be here.
Okay, our first question will go to Matangi. Matangi, are there any specific assessments that are more effective in identifying giftedness in children who are 2E?
Yeah, for sure. I think the talk today highlighted a number of things. And as you heard, part of the challenge in identifying giftedness in children who are 2E is that they may not be demonstrating that giftedness in the classroom in terms of, standard achievement measures, and that's either because of their ADHD challenges or because they're under challenged and not motivated to perform well on those kinds of achievement related tasks. So in these cases, one approach could be to use an ability-based measure that looks at how children think and reason, as opposed to measuring their knowledge about some sort of a curriculum-specific topic. And the Naglieri general ability tests is one that is an example of this. So this one measures how well students reason using content that is nonverbal, quantitative, and verbal, but using images. So they were carefully designed to remove cultural influences, and it has items that contain pictures and shapes and diagrams instead of words, so that it can be solved using any language. And is more so dependent on looking at how well they can think rather than what they know. And then also during the talk, you heard about how motivation can play a key role here. So their interests really, really do shine. And they're more likely to demonstrate their giftedness in areas where they have high interest. And now this could be different from one gifted child to another. So one approach for here is to use a gifted assessment that measures ability or skills across various multiple domains. The Gifted Rating Scale 2nd edition is a measure of giftedness that has a parent and teacher completed form, and it looks at things like intellectual ability, academic ability, creativity, artistic talent, and leadership. And notably, it also has a motivation scale, which is especially useful when you're trying to gauge motivation. So perhaps even if they're not scoring really high on the gifted scales, but you're also seeing some of that motivation issue going on, and you're using other multiple measures, then all of this data really presents a really good picture of what's going on with that 2E child.
That's great. Thank you so much. We have another question here for Arthi. Arthi, they ask, how can we assess overexcitability from a positive lens rather than a negative one?
Of course. Hi, everyone. So assessing overexcitability from a positive lens oftentimes involves shifting focus from viewing these traits as problematic or disruptive to recognizing their potential strengths and how they can contribute to individual growth and development. So, for example, Julie talks about intellectual overexcitability. So sometimes it's viewed from a negative lens, meaning it's seen as obsessive thinking or restlessness. But we can shift that focus to more of a positive lens and recognize it as an intense intellectual curiosity and drive for knowledge. Children with these intellectual and overexcitabilities can excel in so many things like problem solving, critical thinking, and innovative ideas. So once you've shifted that focus, you can encourage children to channel their overexcitabilities into areas where these traits become assets. So in the arts or in leadership or in innovation, and then help them recognize the value of their sensitivities and intensities and guide them into developing coping strategies that can maximize these strengths. So when we do that, when we teach children to understand and appreciate their own overexcitabilities as part of their personality, it leads to better self-regulation. And more importantly, it leads to more confidence. So this positive assessment kind of focuses on appreciating the gifts and potentials that overexcitabilities can bring to a personal and professional life of the child and later adult, rather than viewing them as deficits.
Great, thank you so much. We have another question here for Debbie. Debbie, how can you combine multiple assessment measures to provide a more holistic understanding of a child's abilities and needs, especially when they are both gifted and ADHD?
That's a great question. I think one of the great challenges and privileges in working with both gifted and ADHD children is that you get to find these children's strengths, and you're on a mission to do so. You're not working from a deficit model. And so as a gifted coordinator or a gifted facilitator in any role of these roles where you get to serve these wonderful children, multiple measures plays a huge role in trying to find them and making sure that their instructional environment is something that they can, a place where they can thrive. So you want to do some things like experiential. Bernie Kangor has great work on planned experiences. And you want to pair that then with both quantitative and qualitative data. Our gifted rating scales too, as Matangi mentioned, are wonderful. And I would also encourage that as a person looking for these strengths, you find the people to use these rating scales that understand these children. Then looking at some of the more normed reference testing, like the Naglieri general abilities tests. These tests are tests that really are up the alley for our ADHD and potentially gifted children because of the way they're designed. So looking at the design of the test, having that privilege then to select the assessments and the environments that would best highlight the strengths of these children, and then put all those pieces together, are really the value of having multiple measures when assessing these students for both gifted services and trying to design programming that's effective for them.
That's great. Thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you again, Julie, for the informative presentation, and to our team for answering our attendees' questions. I'd also like to thank all our attendees who joined today. If we didn't get to your questions in this webinar, please send us an email at marketing@mhs.com, and we will forward your question along to Julie Skolnick or to our MHS team. Thank you so much.